Hey, I'm Noam Weissman, and you're listening to Unpacking Israeli History, the podcast that takes a deep dive into some of the most intense, historically fascinating, and often misunderstood events and stories linked to Israeli history. If you're interested in sponsoring an episode at Unpacking Israeli History, or even just saying, what's up? Be in touch with me at noam@unpack.media. Before we start, check us out on Instagram, YouTube, anywhere and everywhere. We are there. And of course, shoot me a note, hit me up at noam@unpacked.media. This episode is an incredibly special one on so many levels. One, we're recording this live in Chicago, baby. That's right. That's right. Two, it's the first time we're taking the show on the road, and we said we gotta do this in Chicago. And three, we have the most awesome guest joining me today. And that awesome guest is none other than statesman, historian, soldier, and best-selling author, and former member of Knesset.
Thank you.
The one, the only Dr. Michael Oren. So without further ado, Yalla. Welcome, Michael, and thank you so much for joining us.
Noam, great pleasure. Great pleasure. Shalom, Chicago. Shalom. Yeah.
Michael, here's what we're going to do. We're going to hear a little bit about your personal story. We're going to then go into different games that I like to play. I'm a lot of fun as a person, like very nerdy games. So we're going to play them together and we're going to have fun, okay? And then I'm going to ask you another few more personal questions. We're going to have, as every episode ends with 5 fast facts. Then you're going to hear an enduring lesson as I see it. And then we'll do some Q&A. So Michael, you have done a lot in your life. You can equally call yourself a historian, a soldier, a diplomat, a novelist, a politician. What I want to hear is this. Tell me the inflection point in your life that made you go from an American from New Jersey, kind of Zionist, kind of smart, kind of interested in politics, to writing the definitive book, this book right here, the definitive book on 1967, to become the Israeli ambassador to the United States, to join the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, to serve as deputy minister in the prime minister's office. I want to hear from you what that inflection point was for you growing up here in the States.
Wow, not so smart as a kid, by the way. We were talking about having lots of learning disabilities before, and you said something about being ADHD. I had every letter in the alphabet. I mean, A, D, B, B, Z, Z, I had everything, and dyslexic and everything. So I was sort of a basket case as a kid, but the worst part of it was I was the only Jewish kid growing up in a working class Sicilian neighborhood. It's actually the neighborhood where they shot the first 2 seasons of The Sopranos until the neighborhood told The Sopranos to get out. They didn't like it. And I used to get the hell beat out of me as being a Jew. I was called a Jew, a Christ killer every day. I'd come home with like a bloody nose, black eyes, and my father, who was a World War II veteran, landed on Normandy Beach, had fought all the way through Europe with his brother Joe, my Uncle Joe, and had liberated a concentration camp. And they took pictures of the horrors they saw there. I still carry them in my cell phone. And he would, when I come home with this bloody nose, he'd open up the album and you say, you see that, son? You see that? That's why we need a strong state of Israel. And when you hear those words and you've just been called a Christ killer, that has a very profound impact on you. A couple years later, I was 15. 2 things happened to me when I was 15. One, I woke up one morning and said, oh my God, I'm Jewish. And I had no idea. I didn't know what the Talmud was. I didn't know what kashrut was. I had read my bar mitzvah. I got bar mitzvah, but I got bar mitzvah in transliteration. I read it in English, Baruch Atah, that kind of thing. I woke up one morning and said, I'm Jewish. I know nothing about being Jewish. And I went out to find a rabbi. I found a wonderful Chabad rabbi, Shalom Gordon, who, with great patience, began to teach me Gemara. The fill-in I have today are from Rabbi Gordon. And then I joined the Zionist youth movement. And at any good Zionist youth movement, the first trip we made was to Washington, D.C. And there I met Israel's ambassador to the United States. And I, being a very chutzpahdik kid, I ran up and I shook his hand. And I said, that's what I want to be when I grow up. I want to be Israel's ambassador to the United States. Literally a serious vow. Everything I did after that was designed to get me to that goal. The gentleman's name was Yitzhak Rabin. And I later became an advisor to Yitzhak Rabin. And so these were the inflection points. And it's just been an extraordinary journey. We're talking about a mutual friend of ours, Yossi Klein Halevi. He's actually my best friend. He calls me the Forrest Gump of the Jewish people because I worked with Rabin, I worked with Peres, I worked with Moshe Dayan, believe it or not. I'm that old. I was the last advisor to Abi Ibn, that kind of thing. So all of these were huge milestones in my development as a Zionist.
Wow. So those are incredible moments. By the way, to be super, here comes a nerd corner alert. I could be wrong about this, but the year that you probably went to see Rabin, was it 73? 70?
I was probably 72.
72.
I
Messed up the nerd corner alert. Yeah. Okay, 72, but that's okay. I was close enough.
When I mentioned to someone that I worked with Moshe Dayan, a young person, they looked at me and they said, "Oh my God, you are so old."
Okay, so we have something else in common, actually. It's actually very special. Your father fought in Normandy. You said my grandfather fought in Normandy. Right. So he was there in D-Day as well. So it's pretty amazing. Yeah. Shout out to Saba Irving, who my son Eyal Yitzchak was here is named for, and my daughters Liana and Nisa as well. Okay, so I want to transition to historical moments. We're going to play a little game, and this is a history podcast. So I want to talk about history. A personal crossroad is when there are moments where a single decision sets your life on a whole new course. And I want to talk and shift to Israel's Rubicon moments, the ones that changed everything. Now, I want to frame this a bit for everyone. A Rubicon moment is a point of no return, a bold, decisive move that fundamentally changes the course of events. The phrase comes from 49 BCE, when Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon River with his army, an act that defied Roman law and kicked off civil war. When he crossed, he actually said, "The die is cast." Since then, crossing the Rubicon has come to mean three things. It's a critical decision when there's no turning back. It's a risky or it's a transformative move. And it's a moment when ambiguity ends and history begins. Now, I want to explain Rubicon moments. I'm an educator, so I want to explain what this looks like. A Rubicon moment happens all over the place. It could be in politics, Russia invading Ukraine. In history, the U.S. Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade. In business, Steve Jobs going back to Apple. And in life, quitting a job to start something new. There are lots of Rubicon moments. Michael, let's try something. I want us to go back and forth, no repeats. Picking what we each believe are Israel's most significant Rubicon moments. Small decisions, big consequences. Moments that once they happened, there was no turning back. You ready?
Go.
Okay, as our special guest, I'll let you go first. Rubicon moment number one. Go for it.
May 14th, 1948.
What happened?
So the Zionist executive meets in the Art Museum of Tel Aviv. The building was chosen on purpose because it had the thickest walls of any building in the city. And the assumption was that if the state of Israel was proclaimed on that day, that the Egyptian Air Force would bomb Tel Aviv, and that this would be the only building in the city that could maybe withstand that bombing. And the Zionist executive met, but the problem is several members couldn't reach Tel Aviv because they were besieged in Jerusalem. And the Zionist executive was completely divided between people who were in favor of declaring the state and those opposed to declaring the state. And among the people opposed to declaring the state were people like Moshe Sharett, no small people. Sharett had just come back from a visit to Washington, and he had met with George Marshall, the Secretary of State, the most influential military figure of his generation, the architect of World War II victory. And Marshall had said to Moshe Sharett, if you declare the Jewish state, you will not be alive another 3 weeks. All of you will be dead again. And he began to call up, believe it or not, 300,000 American reservists to save the Jews of Palestine because they were all going to die. And Sharett came back to Ben Gurion and says, we can't do this. We're going to have another Holocaust within 3 years. We can't do this. And it came down to literally this vote. And the Jewish state was proclaimed on the basis of about 2 votes. I told you earlier I'd worked with Shimon Peres. Peres told me that he once that day on May 14th, he looked in the drawer of Ben Gurion's desk, and there was a note from the head of the Haganah that says, we have enough bullets to fight for 1 week. 1 bullet to fight for 1 week. And Israel's about to be invaded by 5 Arab armies that were lavishly armed by the British and the French. So think about this moment where Ben Gurion has to make this decision. Do I do this and change the arc of Jewish history? Or will I do this and I am responsible for the death of 600,000 Jews 3 years almost to the date after the end of the Holocaust, May 14th, 1948, May 8th, 1945. And he makes that decision. And because of that decision, I'm sitting here tonight, you're sitting here tonight, we're all sitting here tonight.
Okay, I just want to state this isn't a competitive game because I think I feel like you're going to win this game. Right. So it's not competitive. Yeah. But I'm going to give a different. Yes, the Declaration of Independence is very big. Right. I'm with you. 5 weeks later is my Rubicon moment number 1. 5 weeks later. 5 weeks later, that's my Rubicon moment number 1, where there's an Irgun ship named the Altalena. And it arrives in Kfar Vitkin, just north of Netanya, with rifles, with ammunition, immigrants. Menachem Begin demanded 20% of the ammunition go to the Irgun. David Ben Gurion, the leader of the Haganah, refused. And during the unloading, a fight broke out. Now, Ben Gurion ordered Yitzhak Rabin, who you mentioned earlier, to shell the Altalena. Begin told his men to stand down. 16 Irgun men killed, 3 Haganah. Who's the hero in the story? Well, it depends on who you ask and how you view the story and the narrative. You could say, well, Ben Gurion's the hero. Why is he the hero? Because he's the one who said we have to have one army, period. We have to have one unified experience, period. And he's the one who made it happen. People argue that one of the reasons that the Palestinians don't necessarily have the same exact success as the Israelis is because they've never had their Altalena moment. They've never had the moment where there are multiple factions and one says, no, we are taking control and we're going to take lead. And that's what's going to happen, period. Or it could be Menachem Begin who's the hero. Because Menachem Begin said, do not raise a hand against a brother, not even today. It is forbidden for a Hebrew weapon to be used against Hebrew fighters. He said, Milchemet Achim me'olam lo. Civil war, never.
Never.
And if Begin did not make that decision, that moment where he said, stand down, I don't know if the Israelis, if the Jewish people would have the experience that they've had since 1948. Rubicon moment number 1 for me.
Accepted.
Rubicon moment number 3.
Rubicon number 2. 1916. A Polish-Jewish doctor named Chaim Weizmann, who couldn't get a job in Poland or in Austria where he'd gone to medical school, had to go to Manchester, England, and get a job as a chemist working in a factory. And he, really wasn't really interesting for him. He wasn't doing anything. Britain was in war, and it was in a terrible situation. 1916 was the year of the terrible bloodbaths on the Western Front, and the British were running out of artillery shells. And one day, this Chaim Weizmann lights a match next to some mold on a piece of corn, and it blows up. And it turns out that Chaim Weizmann invented acetone, which then becomes the major fuel for the rest of the British Army during the remainder of World War I, for the artillery shells. So this obscure Polish Jewish chemist finds himself catapulted into leadership circles in Great Britain, the greatest empire of its day. Now, Chaim Weizmann just happened to be a Zionist. A chance meeting on a train platform with Herzl, years before, had transformed him into a die-hard Zionist. This is what I want to be. And because he developed acetone, Chaim Weizmann comes into contact with the foreign minister of Great Britain, a guy named Alfred Lord Balfour. And just at this moment, 1917, the British army is about to defeat the Turks in what was then called Palestine. And Balfour comes up with this notion. I'm a religious Christian. I believe that the land of Israel belongs to the Jewish people. I'm going to give this land in the name of the British Empire to the Jewish people. And together with Noam Weissman, they tried to sell this idea to the British government. The British government looks at these two individuals and said, you're crazy. We need Arab oil. What are we going to annoy these people? Don't do this. So Noam Weissman says, I got this guy. I know this guy in Washington who is also kind of a Zionist. His name is Louis Brandeis. And he happens to be a good friend, I think, of Wilson, the president. Maybe we'll all go to Washington and talk to him, because if we get the Americans to say to the British, well, you better issue this declaration, or the United States won't send troops to Western Europe during World War I. Maybe we can do this. And so they go, Weizmann and Balfour. In May 1917, we actually have the date, May 10th, 1917, they go with Brandeis into a meeting in the Oval Office with Woodrow Wilson, and 12 minutes later, they come out with Wilson's agreement for this Balfour Declaration, which be issued that November. All right? In that 12 minutes, everything hung. And the Balfour Declaration becomes the basis of the British mandate in Palestine, which becomes the basis of the 1947 partition resolution creating a Jewish and an Arab state in the land of Israel after 2,000 years. All because somewhere along the line, an obscure chemist lit up a piece of corn and invented acetone.
Wow.
And tell me there's not meaning to Jewish history. Really.
Michael, I don't want to be weird here, but you're really good at this game. You're good. You're good.
Right. We learned 3 great moments in Israeli history. I'll give you a 4th. The 4th is a story that my father told me, and my mother as well, in November of 1977. He said they were in Israel, and they said the absolute craziest thing happened. The most unimaginable thing happened. It was November 9th, 1977. And Egyptian President Anwar Sadat said he was willing to go to the Israelis' home in Jerusalem and discuss peace. This is what he said. I have it in my notes here. And I've chosen this difficult road, which is considered, in the opinion of many, the most difficult road. I've chosen to come to you with an open heart and an open mind. I've chosen to present to you and in your own home the realities devoid of any schemes or whims, not to maneuver or to win around, but for us to win together. The most dangerous of rounds and battles in modern history, the battle of permanent peace based on justice. Israel had snipers on the rooftops in case Sadat's plane was a trap and the terrorists jumped out. It was a small decision to get on a plane. A small thing, you just put your feet on a plane. He made that decision, and since then, the path towards peace between Israelis and Arabs started, with Israel making peace with the most powerful Arab country in the world at the time.
Yes,
Rubicon moment, number 4, Anwar Sadat. Number five.
It's a deeply personal one.
Okay.
You're not going to find it in any history book. I'd gotten out of the Israeli army. I'd been a lone soldier, and about 2 weeks, as they say, my feet weren't dry yet, and I get a call from a certain office in the Israeli government saying, "Are you willing to go to the Soviet Union and work underground with the Zionist underground?" It's a very rough period. Brezhnev, everybody was in this underground, knew they were going to be sent to Siberia within a certain amount of time, and how could I say no? So I volunteered, went through some very rudimentary training, learned how to say "Yani Pani Mayo" in Russian, which means I don't understand Russian, and was in the winter of 1981 was sent out to meet with the Zionist underground. Terrified, absolutely terrified, and my first contact on a deserted train station platform in Moscow was a young, brash, handsome, fearless individual named Yuli Edelstein, and from there, we went into the Ukraine, into places no one ever heard of. You don't want to go to these places like Uzhgorod and Vinnytsia. And I met with the heads of these underground. Many of them, you should know, were teenage girls, teenage women, who were something out of the books of the Warsaw Ghetto, who were absolutely fearless in the face of the KGB. And they all knew they were going to be arrested and sent to Siberia eventually, but they taught themselves Hebrew and they were committed to making Aliyah. And the story is this. It was Passover, and we were going to have a Seder like you see in like the Middle Ages, behind closed curtains, with no one seeing us. And I was going with the person I went to Israel with, another recently released lone soldier from the Golani Brigade. No one's perfect. And it's paratroop.
Yeah.
And
I picked up on that.
we were walking toward the building. We were supposed to meet this family on the second floor, and behind each of the tree was a big KGB thug with a baseball bat, and they were going to kill us. And the head of the underground in this city was a young woman named Yehudit. And she saw this from the window. She opened the window and started screaming, rape, rape, rape. So all the windows in the courtyard opened up. And the KGB people came out with their baseball bats. She ran downstairs. This woman was less than 5 feet tall. And one of the KGB people lifted her up like this. And she said something in Russian. Later, she told me what she said. What are you going to do, beat me up too? Then we ran upstairs. We got through very early part of the Seder before the door burst in, and they arrested my friend and myself. And they took us down the stairs. And as they led us down by the scruffs of our neck down the second story, all the members of this underground stood on that first story and sang Hatikva. So it's hard for me to tell the story. I say this story because it was these heroes. And I've been in the army a long time. I've seen a lot of heroism in my life. I've never seen heroism like this. These people took down an empire. These people took down the Soviet empire. You all know Natan, but there were many Natans out there. And then they came to Israel, 1 million of them, and they transformed the country. And we talk about, the startup nation. So much of that startup nation were the thousands and thousands of engineers and physicists who came to the land of Israel and transformed cities like Beersheba. They're totally unrecognizable. So this is the inflection moment. The inflection moment, 1989, the fall of the Soviet Empire, and the mass aliyah to Israel. But it was because of not someone making a decision, not someone discovering an explosive device, but because of thousands of young people mainly who stood up and risked everything for what they believed in for our people.
Amazing. Okay, I'm a competitive guy. You won 3-2. I will not say my last one.
All right.
That last example is actually incredibly profound because it really shows, in my opinion, what Zionism is. And Zionism it's a verb. It's someone who acts, someone who does, it's someone who engages. It's not someone who pontificates. It's not someone who just believes something. It's someone who gets their fingernails dirty and gets involved and gets engaged and gets invested and does things. And that's what you're talking about. So we have 5 events: Declaration of Independence, Altalena, Weissman and Balfour, Sadat, and the taking down of the Soviet Empire in '89, which led to an unbelievable influx of Soviet Jews into Israeli society. There it is, our first game of Rubicon moments. And I now want to get into, and by the way, if any of you are YouTube Unpacked fans, we have videos on the women of the Refuseniks movements, which is an incredible video. Podcast on the Refuseniks. It's such an important story, and it's an example of a story that's not about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I love telling stories of Israel that are not just about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's just about Zionist identity. And when we reduce the story of Israel to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, we're not really telling the story of Israel. We're telling an aspect of the story, but there's a lot more to the story. Okay. I have mentioned a few times that I like basketball. Specifically, I like Bill Simmons. I don't know how you feel about Bill Simmons or if you know who Bill Simmons is. He is probably the #1 sports podcaster. Try to learn a lot from my Rebbe, Bill. And Bill has a game called What If? What if? The great what ifs of sports history. So I want to play a game with you, Michael, called What If? What ifs of Israel history. These are the moments that didn't happen, but easily could have. Near misses, the road not taken, the decisions that, had they gone another way, might have changed everything. So I want to give you an opportunity to share with me an example. What's a good what if of Israeli history? Like it could have happened. It might have happened. It would have shifted everything if it didn't happen. What's a good what if of Israeli history?
1970-72, okay, the year I met Yitzhak Rabin. 1972, King Hussein of Jordan came up with the notion of the United Hashemite Kingdom program. It was an idea for a federation between what they called the West Bank and Jordan. At the same time, Israel's Minister of Labor, Defense, Yigal Allon, came up with a program called the Allon Plan, which called for Israel to annex parts of the West Bank, the Jordan Valley, East Jerusalem, and the Etzion block, the Gush Etzion block, and have the rest maybe annexed to Jordan. And these two programs came about almost at the same time. But the missed opportunity was that Israel rejected the United Hashemite Kingdom program, and the Jordanians and the Palestinians and all the other Arabs rejected the Allon Plan. So you could conceivably have a situation today where the Jordan Valley would be part of Israel, sovereign part of Israel, the annexation that people talk about, Gush Etzion, part of Israel, East Jerusalem, part of Israel, in an agreed formula with Israel and sovereign Arab states at the time. A missed opportunity.
And what would have looked different? What do you think? What's the...
Well, everything would have been different. I mean, before 1974, before Arafat's speech at the UN, which I covered as a student reporter.
So Arafat goes to the United Nations.
Yes.
1974, is that with the rifle?
Well, the pistol.
The pistol.
He had a pistol. He had a holster. Wasn't sure because when he lifted up his arms, I'm holding up an olive branch and a gun in one hand. And he lifted up and you saw he had a pistol under his jacket. No one talked about the Palestinian issue. Even at the Munich massacre, the Harvard Museum massacre in 1972, Black September, those weren't Palestinians. They were Arab terrorists, weren't Palestinian terrorists. And so the Palestinian issue is really much a creation of the 1970s for the world. I don't say not about Palestinians. They thought of themselves as Palestinians. Remember, in 1947, the partition resolution calls for the creation of a Jewish state and an Arab state, not a Jewish state and a Palestinian state. And if you're referring to Palestinians before 1948, it was Jews. Anybody old enough to have gone to the World's Fair in 1939 in New York, the Palestinian pavilion there was the Zionist pavilion. You could go and have a genuine Palestinian dinner of schnitzel. No kidding, I've had the menu, all right? So it was a very belated notion, the notion of Palestinian nationalism. So 1970, 72 was before all of this. And people weren't thinking about the Palestinian issue. They were thinking about what was then known rather quaintly as the Arab-Israeli conflict. Mm-hmm. Remember it? Well before the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It was an Arab-Israeli conflict. It was a state-to-state conflict. And so, missed opportunity. The Palestinians weren't going to accept it, but who knows?
I just want to understand this for myself a little bit and people listening. Are you suggesting that there's no such thing as Palestinian national identity, or that Palestinian national identity emerged later?
There was no international recognition of Palestinian national identity.
Got it.
It wasn't on anybody's agenda. People weren't thinking about it. People started thinking about it very seriously in the 70s.
Okay, great. That is, I would call an example that no one here thought of for sure. No one was like, you know what, that example that Michael just said.
Right.
Okay, so that's why this is Unpacking Israeli History. There it is. Right. I'm going to give a different example, an example that I think about, but I feel like you might disagree with me on this, which I like. I encourage disagreement. That's a good thing. What if Shimon Peres won the 1996 elections? What if on May 29th, 1996, things changed? What if this surprise victory for Benjamin Netanyahu, which was by a margin of under 30,000 votes, less than 1% of the total number of votes cast. Now, the context, to remind everyone listening, is that this was right after the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin. And they were in conversation about peace between Israelis and Palestinians. Oslo II had just happened in 1995. There were conversations. There were also suicide bombs. And the year before that, there was Baruch Goldstein in 1994, killing Palestinians. There was a lot going on, a lot going on. The initial exit polls had predicted a Shimon Peres win. When he went to sleep with Peres, this was the line, and they woke up with Netanyahu. Labor had the largest party in Knesset. Do you agree that that is a what if? That if Peres had defeated Bibi Netanyahu, that things would have looked different between the two parties, Israelis and Palestinians? Now, I know that Netanyahu largely did continue the peace process at the time, the Y River Agreement in 1998, and then lost in 1999. But how do you see it? Is that a what if or is it not a what if?
It's not quite.
Say what?
Not quite. Let me explain. I was in government at the time. I lived through all this. And it was also, again, an intensely personal experience. I was an advisor on interchurch and interfaith affairs in the Rabin government. Very interesting job. But in the summer of 1995, the suicide bombers began. And one of the victims was my sister-in-law, a Jewish day school teacher from New Haven, killed on the way up to Mount Scopus in a bus bombing. And there were a number of bus bombings, and in the government, we were urging Prime Minister Rabin to halt the peace process. And Rabin at the time was coming out and saying that all the Israelis who were killed were victims of peace. And we were saying to him, Mr. Prime Minister, this is not washing. We're hemorrhaging support. And the polls were showing that that if the elections were held then, say in November of 1995, we would lose. And we were already starting to look for jobs. And so public opinion had shifted significantly against the Oslo process. And the fact that Netanyahu could win by any margin so close after the assassination of Rabin showed the degree to which the population had shifted. And so if Shimon Peres had won, and remember, I had worked with Shimon Peres for years also, and I had great regard for him, but it wouldn't have affected what was going on the Palestinian side. And the Palestinians had embarked on a reign of terror, which would come to a head and climax in October of 2000 in the Second Intifada. And Peres was the last person in the Second Intifada, by the way, to actually acknowledge that Arafat was guilty and culpable and complicit in the bombings. I know this for a fact from other people I worked with in government. Ultimately, it wouldn't have changed because the Oslo process was flawed at its core. And not just because the Palestinians actually don't want a two-state solution. And I, as an historian, not just as someone who's been involved in politics, I cannot adduce one shred of evidence over the last 100, 120 years that the Palestinians actually want a two-state solution. They actually hold the world's record of a people who have turned down a two-state solution. 1937, 47, can I go on? 2000, 2001, 2008. But also because the process itself was flawed. I'll never forget, and I hope I don't go on too long, looking at the Oslo Accords in government in 1993, September 1993, and I'm flipping through this thing, and I get to an exchange of letters between Rabin and Arafat at the end. And in this exchange of letters, Yitzhak Rabin recognized the PLO as the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. He used the P word. There's a Palestinian people. Arafat wrote back and said, I recognize Israel. And I remember looking at this and saying, uh-oh, we're in big trouble because there's no symmetry here. And to this day, not a single Palestinian leader, even the most left-wing Palestinian leader, has ever recognized the existence of a Jewish people, has ever recognized the existence of a second temple, a first temple. All the artifacts we dig up are all fabricated. They call it our history fabricated history. And if you want to look for the essence of the conflict, right there, you could have a two-state solution, but one state's going to be legitimate and the other state's going to be transient. And you will immediately have the conflict will go on. And so back then in 1993, I realized that this process was fundamentally flawed. And that flaw came into fruition in 1995, 1996, and of course, in the year 2000.
Okay, so we're not going to do many more what ifs. Yes, okay. I'm going to ask a question. I just want to explain something you said, just to be on the nose a bit. Meaning, you described what Rabin did as talking about the Palestinian people, as opposed to Arafat not mentioning Israel as a Jewish state, right? That
became the fundamental demand in our peace process, right, of Ehud Barak, Tzipi Livni, and Bibi Netanyahu. All of us demand that the Palestinians recognize Israel as the Jewish state. Understand that that's not a frivolous demand. By the way, Obama supported that too, because we understood that if we're going to recognize a Palestinian state as the nation state of the Palestinian people, there has to be recognition that's mutual of Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people. Otherwise, you'll have immediate irredenta the next day. And no Palestinian has ever come close to recognizing that. And I participated in the last round of negotiations with the Palestinians, and it was Saib Erekat, passed away from COVID, who said something.
You're jumping the gun. I was going to ask you about the Saib Erekat question.
Oh, ask me.
I want to ask you about the Saib Erekat question, but I want to hold on to that for a second because but I already wrote it down in my notes, and I'm going to ask you about the Saib Erekat. I want to challenge you on an idea here. As anyone who listens to Unpacking Israeli History knows, that one of the things I like to talk about is bias, confirmation bias, which is seeing what we expect to see, desirability bias, which means seeing what we want to see. And I think, broadly speaking, the people, I can't speak for people in this room, but broadly speaking, a lot of people in this room care a lot about Israel, care a lot about Zionism, and certainly want to align themselves, even if it is objectively right, the history you are teaching and talking about, they want to agree with you. They want it, meaning it is good for their brains to make sure that they don't have cognitive dissonance and go to sleep at night feeling like, wait, I don't understand how these two ideas collide. So I want to challenge you on a different what if. Is there an example, and I'll get to Saib Erekat in a minute, is there an example in Israeli history where you could look back and you have been part of so many different aspects of Israeli history and you're a historian of Israeli history? I want to know, is there any moment that you could look back at Israeli history and say, there's a what if here, if Israel did something slightly differently, something could have been different? Or is it the case, you're a Zionist, I'm a Zionist, we love Israel, they're part of our DNA, but just to internally challenge myself, is there an aspect of a what if within Israeli society of things might have been different if, or no?
We can go back to 1949 when Ben Gurion gave a blanket exemption for military service to the Haredim, and we know what happened with that. But let's take something from my personal experience. September 2012, ancient history. You remember there was a presidential election going on, Barack Obama against Mitt Romney, very close election. And there was a great fear in Washington and the White House that Israel that summer would undertake military action against Iran, against the Iranian nuclear program. And within Israel, this was hugely controversial, with most of the security heads of the Mossad, of the army coming out against the prime minister saying, we're not going to do this, we're not going to do this, we're not going to do this. And though I was ambassador, and as an ambassador, one does not have an opinion, one represents a government, but behind the scenes, I was very much in favor of what we call, euphemistically perhaps, kinetic action against the Iranians. And tremendous pressure from the Obama administration on us, tremendous pressure within Israel on the prime minister. And there was a big question about whether Israel was going to act. I went to sleep every night with the phone next to my ear, assuming that the phone would ring at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and I get that 3 a.m. phone call. It didn't happen. In September, the prime minister went to the United Nations, and some of you may be old enough to remember, in the United Nations, he drew a bomb, remember this, on a piece of paper and drew a red line across the bomb. That red line was at 250 kilograms. of uranium enriched to 20%, and that Israel would only act if Iran passed that red line. Right after that, we retired to a room, and the prime minister called the president and said, well, you asked for time and space. I just gave you time and space. Unfortunately, with that time and space, the president negotiated a secret agreement with Iran that was not to Israel's interest, a very, very dangerous agreement, the JCPOA. And in exchange for not going to war against Iran, the White House issued, without actually anyone attaching their name to it, a certain word about the prime minister, basically being called a coward for backing down. So the what if is, what if he hadn't drawn that bomb? What if we hadn't waited till today when Iran has not amassed 250 kilograms of 20% enriched uranium, but enough 60% enriched uranium to make 9 nuclear weapons? What if we had acted back in September 2012? And the course of the Middle East would have been very different. Maybe Hamas wouldn't have been so powerful. Hezbollah wouldn't have been so powerful. The Houthis, whoever heard of the Houthis, right? Who knows? That's a huge what if. And it has nothing to do with the Palestinians in that way. It has to do with us and Iran.
Now, I am reluctant to enter a political discussion, but my thoughts are now going. Is what you're seeing with President Trump right now, is that a continuation of President Obama? Is that different? Is it similar? How do you see it?
Well, on the Iranian issue, there's not a tremendous amount of difference. Here the president pulled out of the JCPOA in 2018, calling it the worst agreement ever. And now we see renewed negotiations between Iran and the United States. They were, again, a surprise to us, as they were a surprise to us back when those negotiations began in 2013. We were not informed in advance. And the president actually went further than Joe Biden did, because Biden did not have direct negotiations with Iran. He had indirect negotiations with Iran. It was Obama who had direct relations with Iran. And here now we get into speculation, because the press is saying many things, and the administration's position has changed several times. Whether they were seeking, initially, the position was they were seeking to cap enrichment at 3.4%, which is precisely what the JCPOA was about. Now they're saying that Iran will not have the right to enrich on their soil, which is the Israeli position. We call for the dismantlement of Iran's nuclear facilities. So it's not quite clear, but there is clearly pressure on Israel not to act kinetically. And the president was asked very expressly in a press conference several days ago, have you told Mr. Netanyahu not to attack Iran? And he said, yes. He said, I told him it would not be a very good idea at this time.
Okay, so at the time of this recording, everyone listening, that's where we are right now.
Yes.
And who knows how things will change with time. So we did what ifs, we did Rubicon moments. I want to go into one last aspect, is in the room where it happened. You said something to me right before this conversation. We had a preliminary conversation together. And I was very interested in the room where it happened. You were telling me a story about Saib Erekat. And you said that your 20, 30, 40 years of learning, of studying history and university, and didn't prepare you, or you didn't have even an iota of the amount of understanding that you had from one meeting with Erekat. And you didn't tell me what happened at that meeting, but I'm now excited to hear what happened and what you heard.
Okay, so this is the last round of negotiations with the Palestinians, where we actually sat and talked with the Palestinians. And he said something, to our delegation. He said that...
Who was Saib Erekat?
Saib Erekat was the chief negotiator for the Palestinians.
Okay.
Chief negotiator for the Palestinians, a very intelligent individual, very cunning, and a survivor, a political survivor in a rough neighborhood. And he said to us, quote unquote, you want us to recognize you as the Jewish state. Don't you understand that you're asking us to negate our identity? Wow. Years of study down the tubes. Here we are talking about borders and Jerusalem and settlements and this. And suddenly you realize this conflict is about identity. We wake up in the morning and we are Jews. We are Jews because of 4,000 years of Jewish history and belief and tradition. We don't wake up in the morning and we are not Jews because we are not Palestinians. They wake up in the morning and they are Palestinians because they're not us. And that's what basically he was saying. And that by making peace, and a peace that's actually a real peace based on mutual recognition. But by the way, I recognize there's a Palestinian state, a Palestinian people.
Meaning you recognize there is Palestine.
And I think that Palestinians, under certain circumstances, have a right to self-determination in what they regard as their homeland. If that makes me a leftist, then so be it. Okay? Doesn't mean I'm either going to actualize that right, but that right has ever been reciprocated by any Palestinian leader. And here was Arafat, here's was Saeb Erekat telling us why. Because if we recognize you as a Jewish people, if we recognize that there was a second temple and a first temple and a King David and a King Solomon, all right, then we cease to exist. And I thought to myself, how do we possibly overcome that? And that, yes, this conflict can be managed much better. I'll plug to my new book called 2048, which has the longest chapter in this. It's about the history of how Israel can live another 100 years starting on our 100th birthday, 2048. But the longest chapter is about the peace process and how we can move forward given the fact that the two-state solution is not going to happen. But there are other ways of moving forward and being creative about it that we can better manage this conflict. But I can't solve the Palestinians' identity crisis for them. I got enough problem with our own identity crisis, right?
So I want to go, this is a history podcast, but I want to think about what it looks like to look ahead, to look forward. The majority of the time on this podcast, we are talking about what happened, the story of Israel, the story of the Jewish people. When I introduced you earlier, I said that if there's anyone that could help us unpack the complicated aspects of Israel's past in order to make sense of the present, that it's you, Michael, that you have been in the rooms where it happened, that you are a historian with a perspective. And I think it's important to know that you do have a perspective that you are sharing. We spent a lot of time looking back, reflecting on these turning points, missed opportunities perhaps, what ifs, Rubicon moments. But you said something in Ally. You said, I'm a historian. I routinely say in response to anybody asking me about the future, I have enough difficulty predicting the past. You knew what I was going to say. Okay. So exactly. But I want to ask a question about the future right now. And not about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, but about the American Jewish, Israeli Jewish conflict. I want to know, for you, what does the future of this relationship look like? How do we become closer? How do we become allies with each other? How do we become a people that feels connected? Do you feel like where we're supposed to be? Do you feel like there's work to be done? What does the future look like in our relationship? I'm American, you're Israeli.
It's an extraordinary moment. Extraordinary moment in its pain, its horror, our loneliness. Jewish loneliness today, I think, is our overwhelming feeling that we're so much alone in the world today. And much hangs in the balance. Much of what hangs in the balance is maybe not in our hands. Should an agreement with Iran be concluded that resembles the JCPOA, then Iran will enrich itself again. It will once over again take over Syria. It will rebuild Hezbollah. It will rebuild Hamas. And we'll find ourselves more or less back on the eve of October 7th. But if Iran is coward, if the Iran nuclear program is dismantled, then Israel could have peace with Syria. East could have peace with Lebanon, peace with Saudi Arabia entirely again. And I think important progress can be made on the Palestinian issue as well. Everything hangs in the balance right now. The American Jewish community is as many physicists say about the universe, is expanding and contracting at the same time. It's contracting through assimilation and intermarriage, but it's also expanding, certainly in the Orthodox parts of the community, through big families like your own, where have almost no intermarriage. So the American Jewish community in the future maybe smaller, I'm not so certain, but it's going to be more grounded in its Jewish learning. And perforce is going to be more connected to the state of Israel. It is. So I'm actually optimistic about the future of American Jewry. I want to tell you this right now. And
that's important.
That's where I am. But we also have to acknowledge that we occupy different realities. And the most important thing we can do is to talk to one another, and I know this sounds rather smarmy, but to have Israeli Jews come here and see the American Jewish reality and have American Jews go there, because there's really no substitute. I can give you all the Hasbara in the world, all the explanations, all the history books in the world, but there's no substitute to actually coming and living in the state of Israel and seeing what it's like. That is absolutely true. We have to invest much, much more in Jewish education. You know, we're fighting anti-Semitism on so many different levels now. And yes, we've learned in a Churchillian sense that we can fight anti-Semitism in the courts and in the classrooms and certainly on the computer screens. But the most important way of fighting anti-Semitism, and this has been the rule for the last 3,000 years, is by investing in ourselves and our own identity. And that will also, by investing in Jewish identity, will also bring our two communities closer together, ultimately. Again, it all hangs in the balance right now. A last thought, because I said that this is an extraordinary moment in Jewish history. It's one of those rare moments in Jewish history where every single one of us, everyone in this audience, can make a difference, can actually do something material that can make a difference by being involved, by going out and fighting, by educating, by standing up for who we are.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. I want to conclude this episode the way I always conclude, which is with 5 fast facts. And I'm going to have my producer, Rifki Stern, bring out 5 fast facts from this episode of Unpacking Israeli History. Thank you, Rifki. Number one, this is how we do it. Israel has had a few special Rubicon moments. May 14th, 1948, of course, when the state of Israel was declared. That moment changed the arc of Jewish history. 5 weeks later, the Irgun ship Altalena shows up on the shores of the Mediterranean. Ben-Gurion's decision that Israel needed one army and Begin's decision to stand down ensured Israel would have a unified future. In 1977, Anwar Sadat came to Israel and opened up the possibility of peace between Israel and Arab countries. And the heroism of the Jewish Zionists of the USSR not only took down the Soviet Empire, but transformed Israel. And none of those would have happened without Chaim Weizmann, no relation, inventing acetone. That's fast fact number 1. Number 2, the Alon Plan and the United Hashemite Kingdom program came out at around the same time. But Israel rejected the Jordanian plan, and Jordan and Palestinians rejected the Alon Plan. If these groups had been open to hearing one another, how different would the map and conversation be today? Number 3, Shimon Peres lost the 1996 national election, and Netanyahu won shockingly by under 1% of the votes cast. This was soon after Rabin's assassination in Oslo II. If Peres had defeated Netanyahu, what could have happened differently? Spoiler, Michael is not convinced this one would have changed much. Number 4, in 2012, Israel had to make a decision whether or not to take action against Iran's nuclear facilities. They never did. America and Iran signed the JCPOA. But what if they had decided to take action back in the fall of 2012? And number 5, the future of the relationship between Israel and the American Jewish community is uncertain, but Americans spending time in Israel, Israelis spending time in America is critical, as is investing in Jewish education.
Good.
Those are your 5 fast facts, but here's one enduring lesson as I see it. Before we wrap, I want to bring in something I read recently that really stuck with me. In a piece for Sapir, which is a phenomenal journal. Yes, my older brother Hanan is the director of the Sapir Institute. It's true, but it is phenomenal. Tova Hellerstein reflected on how today it's not enough to talk about facts. We're living in a moment where feelings often don't care about your facts. This is something I say very often. There are pundits who say facts don't care about your feelings. And it's equally true that feelings don't care about your facts. And yet, and this is the part that got me, truth still matters. Context still matters. And history, especially Israeli history, doesn't get simpler the more you learn. It gets more textured, more layered, more human. Hellerstein closed with a line that really hit me. She wrote, Israel should stop being referred to as this knight in shining armor, this perfect place. Rather, she said, Israel is a flawed hero. A different framing, a flawed hero. A flawed hero is something that all of us who watch Hollywood movies can connect to. A flawed hero. And I thought, that's it. That's the story we're trying to tell here. Not perfection, not PR, a real, flawed, courageous, messy, inspiring heroism. Mm-hmm. And just before we close, after what I'm sure everyone here tonight and hopefully everyone listening will agree was a really fascinating conversation, let me ask everyone here, what makes Israel flawed? What makes Israel heroic? I'm an educator, so I like to end with questions. How do you think about that? And can you have a serious relationship with a country and with a people that is both flawed and heroic at the same time? Michael?
King David.
There you go.
What? We have the only national epic where all the characters are flawed. They're deeply flawed.
That's right.
And by the way, most national epics are stories of national success. Our epic book is a story of failure. Right? Amazing. So it's easy for us as Jews to accept this.